our program. We continue to update you and to bring you information with respect to what is happening in the government. And even under the circumstances that we are today with the COVID-19 pandemic here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, government does not stop. Government continues. And today, we are going to be having a discussion on the environment. And I have with me in studio officials from the Ministry of Environment. I have Ms. June Hughes, who is the Director in the Department of Environment. I have the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Environment, Ms. Sharon Rattan, and I have Mr. Darian Edmead, who is the Environmental Education Officer in the Department of Environment. Welcome to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for getting us out of the house.
The environment is always a very interesting and important topic for discussion. And we know that we are in the hurricane season. It began on June 1st and it will end on November 30th. Already we are hearing about systems being formed, and that has to do with the environment. We are in the COVID-19 pandemic, a pandemic that has wreaked havoc all around the world. And one of the questions that is emerging is the environment really the big winner of the COVID-19 pandemic? Is it the big winner? Because, of course, we have interaction between the environment and human beings. And sometimes that interaction between human beings and the environment, it can either be positive or it can be negative. And in this case, what we are seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic, with all of the lockdowns and so on, some good news is emerging. The environment is getting somewhat of a break. World Environment Day is celebrated on June 5th. Ms. Hughes, could you tell us the importance of this day, World Environment Day, and the theme for this year, and why such a theme?
The World Environment Day is celebrated internationally. It's a United Nations Day of celebrations, and it is used to highlight a particular topic, and I will pass on to Darian, who will focus on the theme, because he will speak more in depth on the theme.
All right, World Environment Day, as the director mentioned, is a day that is celebrated around the world, focusing on ways in which that we can really help or protect environment. This year, the theme was ecosystem restoration. Now, when we hear ecosystem, it refers to the living and non-living things in an environment and how they interact. When we speak to restoration, you're dealing with returning something to a place or condition that it was prior. So when we put the two terms, ecosystem restoration, we're talking about restoring the environment to a place or to a state or condition that makes it easier for us to live. Now, this year the theme marked a part of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which is about 10 years. And the intent is to scale up the restoration and degraded or destroyed ecosystems to fight climate crisis. It is deemed to prevent the loss of millions of species and enhance security, water supply, and also livelihoods.
Okay, so restoring the ecosystem, it can never be restored back to 100%.
Correct.
But we can restore it to a point that we are satisfied.
Yes, so the theme really encourages us to think and assist in the recovery of our ecosystems that have been degraded or destroyed by our activities, and to find ways to conserve whatever we have left.
Okay. Now, in terms of, you mentioned that word conservation. What are some of the conservation practices that are important to the restoration of our ecosystem?
Okay, so we can look at ways in which we can help our ecosystem, but before, I hope that it is not a question that you have, Mr. Lesroy, but
Go ahead.
Before we speak about how we can restore them, let me just highlight one or two ways in how we first destroy it. So
Yes.
when we think about the environment, we understand that everything that we do have an impact, whether negatively or positively. And some of the things that we do include stuff like dumping of waste in the environment. Whether it's plastic, furniture, appliances, it doesn't matter what it is. Improper disposal of our waste. That's one way in which we're destroying the ecosystem. We look at cutting down trees or deforestation. When we do that, what you're doing is that you're reducing the air, you're reducing the water, you're reducing food, and you're also reducing home for animals. We can also think about overfishing. It is also another way in which we are actually destroying the ecosystems. The way in which the human think, sadly to say, is that we only think about what we want for the time and how it is benefiting us. It's not so much about down the road. So you go and we overfish because for that particular time, it's satisfying a need for the individual. But when we do that, we are reducing our resources. We can also look at clearing of lands. Now, this could be a little bit controversial in the sense that we know that development is important. And when it comes to development, sometimes the environment get the last respect or the last consideration, because what we see is the big picture of a building. But we don't really look so much into the different habitats or the different things that we are changing in the environment in order for us to construct that particular development. And sometimes it's only when there's an environmental impact that we always come back and start to figure out what we could have done differently or try to solve the problems that we are having. And I also want to highlight San Manuel as well. It's also a problem that also destroy the ecosystem. Because as you sand mine, it leads to flooding, and it also alters the waterway ingots and so forth. Now, to the question that you asked me, Mr. Williams, in terms of what can we do? Now, based on the impacts that I've mentioned, it means that we're encouraging persons to plant more trees. Mm-hmm. If it's a situation where you have to clear land, if you remove 2 trees, let's find a way in which we can put 3 more back. We can also encourage persons to do simple things at home, vegetable gardens and so forth. All of these are contributing to a healthy environment. We can also look at basic things like community cleanups, reducing our dependency on plastics that pollute the terrestrial and the marine environment. And we can also reduce the excessive burning of fires. This is something that we see across, I think it's at a vast, it's something that you see all the time. You know, sometimes it's just to clear a particular area, but rather than just us focusing on how we can contain that particular area, we just light fires and allow it to burn. But as it burns, it's destroying everything that's in its path.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Because I'd like to make a connection. With all the examples that Darion has given, all of these activities lead to the big umbrella of climate change. The degradation, the constant degradation of the environment leads to changes in the climate patterns. And this is why today, with the constant cutting of the trees, with the constant pollution, we are seeing stronger hurricanes. When I was growing up, the strongest hurricane I knew as a child was Hurricane David in 1980. That was just 75 miles per hour. And now that is just a Category 1 hurricane. Based on what we have experienced thus far, we now go up to Category 5. So all of these actions are defined under that umbrella of climate change. And this is what we are hearing about, and in terms of how it impacts the entire world. Rising temperatures, because we're cutting trees. We're cutting trees all the time. The emissions of the pollutants that enter the atmosphere, and all of that is having an impact. I want to say that very often I think people see climate change as this, concept that they cannot relate to, but all of it, the emphasis here is to let you know that all of it contributes to climate change, which is a changing of the regular climate patterns. Where we would have experienced, where we know it would have been a rainfall season and get more rain, it's now less. I was so happy for the rain today.
Yeah. And so you clearly outlined, Darian, the environmental degradation and why it is so important to have environmental conservation and also the protection of the environment and some of the practices in a very tangible way that can help to protect the environment and help to conserve the environment. Now, one of the things that is emerging, of course, with the COVID-19 pandemic is that of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, with the lockdowns and less traffic, motor vehicle traffic, you have less air traffic, less sea traffic. We're having less pollution, water pollution, and air pollution. In fact, I was looking at a program narrated by David Attenborough. And in India, something happened in India that people came out of their houses and started going on their roofs because they could see the Himalayas. Oh, wow. They couldn't see the Himalayas because the Himalayas have just been blanketed by thick smog, by the pollution and so on, that the mountains could not be seen. And all of a sudden, the mountains can then be seen. Cleaner air. The waters, they said, off of Alaska, or the waters in Alaska, humpback whales are so happy again. They've found a new life. Why? Because you don't have all these cruise ships trekking, cruising through the waters and disrupting their lives. In fact, the documentary saw them dancing. They were happy. So, June, what do you have to say about that in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions and all that is happening in terms of, nature sort of restoring itself?
Unfortunately, okay, maybe I start positively. With COVID and with the fact that the world has had to withdraw back to their individual homes. We've seen a respite in the excessive burning of fossil fuels. But unfortunately, that's just a blip in time. A good portion of the world is almost back to business as usual. So the little change that we saw, the really good ability of the world being able to breathe again, and the waters being renewed, it's only short-lived, unfortunately. We continue. One of the things that climate change and the burning of fossil fuels has come about is the increase in production, increase in economic activity. And so you are then, in essence, asking the world to reduce that type of activity. And so we need to find a solution where we can continue to progress while not harming the environment. COVID showed us that it can be done. It showed us that the impact that we were having. And so I think the world now has to take up the challenge and see if we can come up with solutions that would reduce our greenhouse gas, solid solutions, because we have solutions, but we must embrace them and take them on and really believe in them and use them and to reduce and come up with something that can work, and work not just in the short term but in the long term to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, now June, tell me what the Federation, of course, is part of some of these treaties to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and all of that. And could you bring us up to date in terms of the legal framework where those things are concerned? Because we have signed on to all these climate change treaties and so on.
So we are parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Under that fell the Kyoto Protocol, which expired in 2012, if my memory serves correctly. And then in 2015 came the Paris Agreement. And all these agreements are towards getting the world to reduce, getting individual countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So we happen to be one of the first 15, I might have that number wrong, who signed on to the Paris Agreement when it was open for signature in April of 2016.
Okay.
It would be useful to say that the smaller islands don't contribute to the high levels of greenhouse gas emissions, and that is one, but we are very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And that is one thing we have to note, and I think all OECS ministers are noting as we prepare for the COP26 in Glasgow, in England. Well, the jury is still out on whether that will be a physical meeting or not. It seems to be trending more as a virtual event at this time. But that is a position that all of the ministers of environment in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, have looked at and how they're going to negotiate to say where we contribute the least as small Caribbean countries, but we have the greatest impact. So how do we balance, that vulnerability with the kinds of natural phenomena that we experience?
P.S., I think you made an excellent point, and that is while the larger industrial countries of the world are contributing towards the climate change impacts, the big impacts, it is the small island developing states that are really suffering most from those impacts. Because we are small, the hurricanes and other natural disasters, rising sea levels, and all of that coastal degradation, and all of that sort of a thing. And because we are small, the impacts are felt greater. And also, because we're developing states, we don't have all the resources in the world to address those things. So it's a sort of a double whammy.
It is. It's a very real challenge that we face. And I think that, and this is one of the reasons why we like to come to Working For You, that we want the general public to know the important role that environment plays in making these decisions. I am going to refer to a project that we are looking forward to participating in. Just for this week, we've been preparing to implement this project shortly in St. Kitts in particular. And it goes by the name, the Climate and Ocean Risk Vulnerability Index. The shortened form is CORVI. Now that long fancy word is just, it just refers to, we are going to be investigating or investigating what data there is so that we can build a risk profile of Basseterre. Now Basseterre, our capital city. It is important that we understand the risks associated with the capital city. Of course, everywhere in St. Kitts, don't get me wrong, everywhere, but we are going to begin with the capital city as that is where many of the services are concentrated. And with this information, we hope to look at how the risk profile, what is the risk, what are the different risks, and how we are going to use that information for the future planning of Basseterre. Now, it's not a big fancy project where you would see physical changes, but I want to emphasize the importance of the data. The data, and that is usually one of our weakest points, the data would help us to be better decision makers about any future planning of Basseterre. The other point I would like to emphasize is that it brings together the key stakeholders in this country so that you don't have public works just focusing on maybe a coastal erosion, fixing that problem, and then there is another ministry focusing on the fisheries, but we are taking it in a wholesome way so that we can understand how the synergies between the different risks and using it as a holistic assessment to leverage financing. June could tell you that we hear on the international landscape, we hear about climate financing, climate resilient projects. Now, how do we access it? We have to have the information about our own country so that we know how to better invest and how to better make climate resilient decisions. Now we are beginning with Basseterre, and the capacity that we would build would help us to replicate these studies. Let us emphasize that. Replicate these studies, and perhaps the next one we could do is Charlestown or even more areas in St. Kitts, because we are one coastal community, if you look at it. Because we have many communities around the island who depend on fishing, Sandy Point, Deer Bay, and we can look at the risks of those communities as we advance. But we are going to begin with the capital city, Basseterre, and we hope to have that information so we could have better investments in terms of our response to this climate change phenomena.
Right. Now, in terms of the theme, June, ecosystem restoration, focus on resetting our relation with nature. What sort of a legal framework do we have in place, or are we working on to really push that theme?
that theme, and all environmental teams.
Yes.
We have our current legislation, our current act, is the National Conservation and Environment Protection Act, number 5 of 1987. And you could appreciate it was done in 1987, and a few years have passed. So we have a draft act in place, the National Conservation and Environment Management Act, and it's mainly drafted. We still have to do some tweaks to it, but our plan currently is to engage some key stakeholders to work with us to update that draft, and our ultimate goal is to get it before Parliament this year. Why are we updating NCEPA? In 1987, it was considered to be a key comprehensive environmental piece of legislation. They touted it as one of the best pieces of legislation in the region at the time. But it needs strengthening. We need to evolve some of our environmental management practices, and so we are looking to make the necessary changes and update it. The new act will be called the National Conservation and Environment Management Act. And like I said before, it bring environmental management in the Federation into the 21st century. We plan to strengthen all the sections, and we've added a new section on access to genetic resources and sharing of benefits. This would protect our people and protect our genetic resources for our people, and it would entrench into law our rights to our genetic resources. We've also strengthened the section on pollution control, expanding and adding to the definitions and the procedures for dealing with violations. Now, you can appreciate that this is not a small document, and I would like to recommend that we come back at another time when we just talk about that legislation alone.
It will take the whole hour.
Yes.
And then some.
Let's want to further point out that in 1987, the concept of climate change was not around. We were just starting out and focusing on protection and conservation. So we really, from time to time, we have to revisit the laws of the country as the context evolves. So we are engaging. We have done an in-house. We've done an in-house review, and we are also looking at a legal review, and then we are going to go back to our stakeholders to validate, to make sure that what we have amended fits in with the current context and possible future contexts that we can predict.
So, Mr. Williams, before you go on, as the PS and the director would have mentioned, is that the good thing about this act is that the issues that I would have highlighted in my first intervention is that it would help to solve some of these issues, such as sand mining. So already it will be a way in which we are already helping to restore our ecosystem. And I don't know how many persons that would have even listened to our Minister Eric Evelyn's speech on World Environment Day, where he spoke to some of the things that the Department of Environment is involved in as it relates to environmental restoration. And I think, if you permit me, I can just highlight one of those two things as we move forward. Now, the Department of Environment is part of the lead agency for funding with Jeff. And under one of those projects, the IWECO, there are some activities that involve environmental restoration in both St. Kitts and also in Nevis. It's IWECO, you might have to help me, integrating water, ecosystem, land and ecosystem management Okay, something of that sort, so that the general public would understand what WECO is really about.
To integrate land, water, ecosystems.
Okay, thank you, PS. So within that, Mr. Williams, in Nevis, some restoration work would have been done with the help of the Nevis Historical Conservation Society. Yes, we would have focused on some areas. One of those areas was the Coconut Walk Estate, where some over 1,300 trees have been planted at the Coconut Walk. This was a total of about $150,000 project to help to restore that particular area. It was 10 acres Coconut Walk, and 5 acres to the area there at the Patwork Estate, the Corrier Patwork Estate. There was also work done to help with the St. Thomas Improvement Group. They team up with the St. Thomas Improvement Group to restore wetland at the Nelson Spring by removing non-native invasive species of plants and so forth. And we, so that's some of the things that we have been doing to the project. In St. Kitts, to bring it a little closer home, for those of you who even ventured to the College Street Gut area, you'd have realized that some work has also been done as well. We have installed some gabion baskets and plant grass and trees to help to protect the gut itself from eroding. It was about 282 baskets aligned that area there, and also some grass plant along the banks and so forth. So work continues, the restoration work continues. The Department of Environment is actively working, and we trust and hope, as we would have made this presentation this afternoon, that persons would have, would really get involved and see what they can do in order to help with the restoration process. And also, one of the PS baby is the plastic issue. It's another way in which we're trying to restore the ecosystem by controlling the plastic pollution, plastic waste. And we're hoping that by the time we're finished with that, in terms of the draft and the plan for it, that persons would be more conscious of their choices.
Right. Now, Darian, you obviously, part of your role at the department is to educate persons, because I think that change happens with education. And if people begin to understand how their behavior is impacting the environment and how the environment can impact their livelihoods and their lives, then we'll start a conversation. So what is being done by the department to help people to understand this aspect of stewardship? Because that is basically what it is. God gave us the earth, but he made us stewards. We are to take care of it. What sort of programs, education programs that you have at the department to help from the youngest up to the oldest to understand the importance of caring for the environment?
Mr. Williams, with June for the Department of Environment has been, or should have been, our Environment Month, where we try to plan activities that would cater to everyone, from the youngest, as you mentioned, to the oldest. But due to COVID and the ongoing climate in terms of movement, our schedule got interrupted. Some activities we were able to have. So, for example, we were able to start off the month at Antioch Baptist Church, and we had our radio program. We were able to have our minister deliver the program, his speech, his World Environment Day speech as well. But there were other activities that we had planned that would have wanted to help to engage the general public in. But outside of that, other things that the department do on a yearly basis as it relates to public education is that, first of all, we encourage persons to visit our social media pages, such as our Facebook, our Instagram, and so forth. We try to make daily posts so that persons could understand the different messages or the different ways in which they can help to conserve or protect the environment. We also have school programs where we periodically visit and address different topical issues. Sometimes it's whatever issue that the school would ask us to come and provide. That is also another area. Now, one of the things that the Department of Environment is looking to do is what we call an environment program within the schools. This is something that we were hoping that would have been off the ground by this point in time, where we have some pilot schools, and we use those schools in order to carry out a lot of our environmental messages. So it's more like environment clubs within the schools with the support of the Department of Environment. We are still hoping that that would be something that we are able to get off the ground. And this is not just, when we say schools, it's not just primary school. We want to go as young as possible, because there are simple things that the toddlers or so forth can learn at their age in order for us to move forward. So I can say that by hoping, once the climate changes between now and the opening of the new school year, it's a program that we are hoping that we'll be able to implement within the schools. Outside of the schools and the general public, which we try to do as much of these type of programs as possible. We also try to participate in as much open exhibitions that is being organized by different departments, where we can go and more or less engage and update the general public as to what the department is doing and what they can do to help the environment as a whole.
Okay.
I think Darian can elaborate some more on how he has recently redesigned the Facebook page, because you have things there like word of the day, to create interest, and a lot more tagging of the primary schools. We tag the primary schools and different organizations on specific. I don't know why you left out that.
Okay, so Mr. Williams, that's my PS. Right. We also right. We also have the word of the week. We have the alphabet series, where every time we post, we try to focus on a different, whether it's an animal, whether it's a plant, that speaks to our alphabet, because we want to get persons more aware of the different biodiversity that surrounds us. The word of the week, it is something that we recently started, and as P.S. mentioned, we have been tagging a lot of the schools and so forth, because what I can say, Mr. Williams, is that at the end of this Word of the Week series, I cannot say when we're going to end, not end as in to cut off, but we want to do it in phases where, for example, if we do, let's say, 15 words, at the end of those 15 words, there's more or less a social media quiz, some form of way to get people or students involved, so that questions may come back based on the word of the week that we might have posed. We're hoping to also do puzzles for the primary schools, word filling, what do you call it, word search, yes, word search and so forth. So these are things that we want to do. And the EnviroFeud. This is one of the things that we wanted to do within our month of activities. We wanted to engage different ministries or departments. Of course, the Department of Environment would not be participating, or because we would be more or less facilitating the event, to see how much other ministries or departments know about the environment. So we know the Family Feud game is the same concept. We had already started moving forward, and now I was already excited about it. But we're hoping that as things clear up, that we still will be able to have this EnviroFeud, and we also had an environmental exhibition planned, Mr. Williams, where people can come and see different things that they can do. We will also be able to more or less showcase what we have been doing for the year or the years, whether it's through videos, whether it's through things that were made or so forth, so that people can have a better appreciation for the environment and what they can do. Finally, as was mentioned, we also have a new series where outside of the Word of the Week, we are trying to focus on different agreements that the Department of Environment is engaged in. I think earlier this afternoon you would have asked about what we are, one of those, the NCMA and so forth. So all of these we are hoping would be featured on our Facebook page, where you can go and see and learn about the different agreements. Currently, I can tell you the one that's ongoing. It's the Basel Convention. That is the one that we are featuring this week, and coming up will be more or less the Montreal Protocol. So we try to see how much we can, put the things out there so that persons can understand the different agreements that the Department of Environment and St. Kitts and Nevis, by extension, is a part of.
That's why we're looking forward to EnviroFeud. We think it will be exciting, because one of the resources is you could go to the page and you learn, and let us not forget the mascot competition, which we were not able to launch as yet, but we are looking forward to doing that. We still have some time and to work along with tourism and the Sustainable Destination Council, who during the month of July do a plastic-free July, but everything is up in the air now. But we are hoping we have the opportunity to launch the mascot competition for our creatives who could come up with a design, and that one is speaking to reducing the use of plastic. So these are things we're looking forward to.
Yeah, June, one of the things that amazes me is that sometimes they say when the elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And what I mean by that is that you have big brokers sitting around tables and negotiating in terms of climate change. There's a lot of politics that is basically involved. And sometimes when these brokers are politicking, the environment is not something that comes to a standstill. The world does not stop. And so therefore, their decisions, those people making the decisions, can have serious consequences for millions of people in the world. The small man on the street. So on one hand, while we are trying to advance the cause for environmental conservation and protection and so on, the big players sometimes determine a lot of what happens in terms of the environment. Policies, that's what I'm getting at. Government policies and all of these things that really impact what really happens in a country. For example, what are some of those policies that you see in the country that is trying to advance, environmental protection, environmental conservation, a sort of a slowing in terms of climate change and so on?
Yeah, we have, thanks, PS. We have a national climate change policy. We also have an adaptation strategy for the nation as well. I am trying to think of what else we have that. I'm drawing blank, but
Thanks.
Thanks.
It's very edgy. I can assist. It's a very edgy issue
that you have raised there. What you would find in the islands, there are many policies. And it is good that we did the climate change policy. I think it was 2017, June. And as a result of that, we are attracting a lot of projects to enhance or help us to respond to the climate change issues that we are facing all the time. The one that I referred to, that is a climate change policy. We have climate change response, and we have little projects that help us to report internationally on our nationally determined contributions in terms of greenhouse gases emissions. Now, what we have to address, why is the edgy? We have to address our local, the way we see environment playing a role in St. Kitts. Because my assessment is that it is peripheral. It seems to be peripheral, and it needs to come more center so that we can take advantage and leverage in that geopolitical world. If we don't get it right locally, so that we understand that environment has to come more to the center rather than say, make a decision and say, well, let's call environment after. We have to address that in-house in St. Kitts Nevis and provide that or find that balancing act with development versus environment. Okay? So that we can get more into the international geopolitical discussion and get that leveraging and attract climate resilient financing so that we could have the better responses for when these things impact us.
The geopolitics and all of that is one thing. The COP21 and COP22 and COP26
yes.
and all of these kinds of things. What I'm simply saying is that you have big brokers, heads of state coming together and so on, and spending a lot of money in terms of the coming together. But in terms of the implementation of what they're doing, it seems to go at a very slower pace than the implementation of all these policies and so on. Tends to have some sort of a slow sort of implementation. Yes.
I can hark it back to that example when I said in preparation for COP26, all OECS ministers, one of the points they strongly agree on and would be going into that conference with is that we are vulnerable. We contribute the least to the greenhouse gases, and when a hurricane hits us, it sets back entirely our economy. It impacts our people. It destroys livelihoods. So we need more to prepare ourselves for the responses. But there is one thing that, as we speak, jumps out at me, Les Roy. One of the challenges we face is that we don't capitalize on a lot of the funding, because one of the criteria to get some of the funding is that the NGOs or community groups have to apply for the funding. A lot of it doesn't come through the government, and that is a very weak link we have to get NGOs and community groups to have the kind of leadership, understanding, and passion about the environment to benefit from these things and spread it out in our country. That is one thing. June, you want to add to that?
Because when you asked the question, Mr. Williams, my brain kept going down a particular pathway, and I couldn't get it stopped. So I actually jotted down some stuff as it was forcing me. In that, when the big boys and the big countries get around the table and they make decisions, sometimes they get their constituents, who they are making decisions for. A lot of the times they make decisions based upon the financial implications. And we have to keep remembering that we have a constituency. we are serving our people. We have to listen to civil society. We have to listen to the ordinary citizens. And our people have to become empowered to know how their environment is having an impact on them, or how they are impacting the environment, and demand change, push for change. Sometimes we may not have the money to do it, but we are creative enough to come up with ideas that may not necessarily need funding, and we can make little inputs for climate change, for instance. That's a current topic. Water conservation. Water is impacted seriously by what is happening with the climate. And I think our people should be aware of the impacts and how they can help. The little changes that can make, and the changes that they can make don't necessarily have to be any great financial thing. Turn off the water pipe when you're taking a shower, and instead of letting the water run on you, turn it off, soap up, and then turn it back on. When you're washing dishes, you catch some water in a basin, and then you wash the dish, and then you rinse in the sink or something like that. Just small measures. But the point I was trying to make is that if our people, if civil society doesn't rise up, doesn't agitate, doesn't demand action, then the big boys will stay out there. They will slow down implementation. They will do it their way, and their people will suffer.
Yes, because let's face it, we've had two presidents in recent times in the United States of America. One of them with a totally different view on climate change, pulled out of the Paris Agreement and so on, and you know what that means.
Yeah.
We have another president now who said, well, look, the environment is important, and let us rejoin the Paris Accord. And my point is, when you have that sort of a politics taking place, when we really kind of come together in one accord to recognize the importance that, our actions are having on the climate, change in the climate and the impacts, then something is wrong.
Yeah.
And Derek, going to you, sometimes when we speak about climate change, the only thing that I am hearing is global warming. And I want to really think that sometimes people think that climate change and global warming are synonymous or that they're interchangeable. Yes. Could you tell us the difference between climate change and global warming?
Well, the PS started off a definition of what climate change really is. It deals with the different changes in the atmosphere over a particular time or period of time. So climate change involves a lot of different changes within the environment, which you highlighted many of them. Global warming is like a one peck of what climate change really is. This only speaks to the rising of temperatures that cause, let's say, we know the glaciers and so forth to melt. For example, global warming is just more or less that, the heating of such and such. But climate change is a whole monster, because it's beyond the heating of the Earth surface to melt ice, which we know and global, which is a result of global warming and melting these other areas. So it's a whole different, it's a whole bigger picture, climate change, that is. And while I'm on the floor, Mr. Williams, if I could just piggyback on something that was said by the PS and yourself as it relates to, environmental issues and what we are doing. As you spoke, there's an agreement that came to mind to help more or less. It's a regional agreement. I don't know if you know of the ESCAZU or ever heard of the Principle 10, which is it's really a regional agreement that focus on, it's actually Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration on the SDGs. What it does is that it focuses on 3 pillars. Participation. It is saying that there's a right to participate in environmental matters, and we're speaking to the public and as civil society was mentioned. You also give the right to access to information, because information is also important for the general public, and it also speaks to the right to access to justice in environmental matters. And with these 3 pillars highlighted through the Escazú Agreement, what it's actually doing is that it is saying that we, as a community, as a people, we have a right to stand up for environmental matters. And as the discussion was going on in terms of, as you were mentioning, how big countries and so forth, persons in high position make these decisions. The public need to understand that they too have a right as it relates to the environment, because the decisions that are being made would more or less threaten what our environment would be in the future. Because so this agreement is more or less set to safeguard our future.
Yes, but another point that I wanted to make is that sometimes because we are small, sometimes our voices sometimes are stifled because we are small. In standing up to big countries, those big industrialized countries, whether they be Japan, China, the United States, European Union, countries, China, and so on, standing up and making your voice heard. Because sometimes, they really think that we are insignificant. But as the PS was really saying, that their actions are threatening us. Are threatening us as small island developing states. And that is why our voices need to be made louder. Even louder than theirs, because they're the ones that are guilty of contributing more to the problem than we are, but we must not suffer more because of the problem that they would have created.
That is true, but how do we make our voices louder? And I relate it to this. We are not very good with mining our own data. Because as you speak about small countries, small islands in the small Pacific islands, Seychelles comes to mind. They have done some successful things there with environment, but they have the data. We have to learn to mine our data. We have to be data driven, especially in everything, but for environment, we have to be data driven. Far too often, we don't have the data. So we have to be trying to figure out, well, we know we want help for X, but what specifically are we addressing under X? And that is something that we have to seek to improve.
Okay, we are going to go to the phone lines. We'll continue our discussion, but just to see if anyone wants to call in and share something with us. The numbers to call are 466-2666. That's 466-2666. 662-8674. That is 662-8674. 767-4765. 767-4765. And the overseas number is 1-239-645-4500. 1-239-645-4500. We welcome your calls. June, you wanted to say something. I see you bursting there.
No, I wanted to support what you were saying in terms of empowering our people having to stand up and speak, because, and also something that the PS said, you really and truly, you cannot expect, if you want something to happen, you're going to have to agitate for it. In this world, you only get so much say. and the big boys can overshadow you. But one of the things, I jotted a little note here on my thing, is that in the United Nations, everybody gets one vote. And so the small island states have banded together. In climate change, it's the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, and we are 44 countries, I think. No, that is a significant block. That's a significant voting block. So we can make steps if you come together as a group. So us St. Lucius as a small country may not be able to make much change, but when we come and we get a bigger group, yeah, and you do a bigger group, you can get yourself heard. And I don't think we've made a lot of progress. Basically, just for instance, in 2015, COP21, they started out the negotiations at 2 degrees Celsius, stabilizing the Earth's atmosphere at 2 degrees Celsius. Now, 2 degrees Celsius is not something that's good for us. We're going to lose too much at 2 degrees Celsius. And the small islands lobbied, and we got other people in other countries to support us. And we got them to agree to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and we got them to start saying 1.5 degrees Celsius. And I think you hear now, you don't hear them talk about 2 degrees now, they talk about 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that was just getting your partners, getting other people in other countries to support you and get your ideas forward. So we may be small, but we can still make contributions and make an impact on the negotiations.
Right. Now, a lot of our islands within the Caribbean, we rely heavily on tourism. And we realize what has happened with the COVID-19 pandemic and how tourism would have suffered. But in a certain sense, the environment would have gained. The environment would have gained, because one of the things with tourism, and I wanted to address that, and the environment, is that sometimes we think of tourism and we think of the monies that tourism can bring to us. But in terms of our tourism plan, environment is not always featured in it. Now we're seeing more of that. Of course, I realize that the Ministry of Tourism is partnering with the Department of Environment in the plastic, the cleanup campaigns and all of that thing. But when we're building, do we consider the environment? When we're building our marinas and our ports, do we consider the reefs? Do we consider all of that? I know there's supposed to be environmental impact assessments and and so on. But tourism in particular has to think of the environment.
So I won't speak for tourism, I'm going to speak from the outside looking in. I think this is nothing new. People have already done it already. The whole sustainable development concept. I think in 2021, it should be something that we will be embracing, so that anything we do, so not just tourism, but everything that we do it with sustainability as our foundation. Sometimes the measures that you have to put in place may be a little bit more expensive than the business as usual measures. But we have to decide what is best for us, because we're not doing it. Once you're here, once you get to my age and stage, you're thinking about the people who are coming behind us. And so we have to make sure that St. Kitts and Nevis looks better for the people who are coming behind us, not worse.
Right, so it's sustainable development.
Yeah.
And the UN has recognized that, and it has all of the sustainable development goals. Now, what with the sustainable development goals that they want to at least achieve by 2030, right? what can you tell me about these Sustainable Development Goals and those goals that particularly speak to the environment?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm trying, let me see if I could pull it out on the top of my head now. I know climate change, there's the one on climate change. Because the thing about the SDGs, they are not like, there isn't one on environment. They're on a number of different topics that are impacted by environment. So you have on waste management, you have on climate change, you have a whole number of different ones. So I can't remember them exactly right now, Mr. Williams, but remind me the last part of your question.
Yeah, how, what in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals speak to environment and how we must really move towards the achievement of those.
Remember, the whole goal of sustainability and the whole goal of the environment movement is to not make anything worse, is to improve. Whatever you do it within a sustainability umbrella. And
I think you would have touched
because
some of it before, when you spoke about the whole thing in terms of water. Goal number 6, of course, speaks to clean water and sanitation,
right.
And goal 7 speaks to affordable and clean energy. So we have been talking about renewable energy.
Right.
And I think when I asked before in terms of the country and what the government is doing, the government has a renewable energy policy.
Right.
That you're talking in terms of geothermal and
solar.
And wind and so on,
The push has really been government and private sector.
Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And good afternoon to the good men and women here from the environment, updating on climate change and different things. Now, my question to you all. Now, we ain't getting plenty rain like now, like used to before. And my question to you, don't you think, what you are planning to do? I mean, what do you think plan to do to combat this climate change? Because our environment are very suffering, our farmers suffering, our fishers suffering, and all those things. So what do you think the plans and program you think our government should do to combat all these things? Because we got to prepare for it. Because we know that the sun, we're getting plenty sun now, the sun coming hotter and hotter, and all those things come because of climate change. Our environment, we get sometimes, we get a certain time of year, we come down with all kind of flu and all kind of things, sickness. Now we got the deadly corona disease now. So I would like to you all to tell me what plan and program with all things the government should plan for this climate change, especially with our water sources and all those things. Because certain time of the year we don't get rain at all. Only sometime when the hurricane season coming up, you find that we get plenty rain all like now. So good program. I will continue to listen. You all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Let me begin with reassuring him that we are working. We are working to assist with some of these challenges. And one I would like to point out, because it's visible, is with water. The Ministry of Environment works a lot with the water department and sustainable. But I could give the example with water right off the bat. The caller spoke to sometimes water is not available. We looked at some schools, and sometimes if for whatever reason work is being done in the area and water has to be cut off, we cannot have schools without water. So we had a project which installed water storage systems in schools throughout St. Kitts and Nevis So these are some of the ways in which environment advises the government, and these are some of the ways we work with the ministries across the government. So that's a tangible example. If you go to the William Connor School, and right behind the next street over from the William Connor School, there is a Matinee Preschool. You will see some large black tanks. If you go to the preschool at the industrial site, there's at the Keon, there is at Beach Allen. I'm trying to remember going to the island, Deep Bay, Tabernacle, Sandy Point. I think those are some of the schools we have recently installed those water tanks, and that is a way of addressing any water shortage for those schools during the time they're at school or in the event of a hurricane. We know we can have water there. Water is there that we can access. And we work along with the water department a lot on water projects. So that is one. One of the things that we are excited about is the national park on the highway, where we know some of the lands have been used for the solar, the new solar company, the new solar farm, and the other half, a lot, 400 and something acres, June? Yes, I have it correct. We have plans for it. We are still in discussion, but it's what I call a positive investment in our environment. Whenever those are unfolded, you would see is a positive investment in our environment, considering all of these things that we have just addressed. Sustainability, using, biodiversity, feeding our people. It's a whole mecca of all of the issues that we are facing right now. Okay, that would be all a part of that project. So right now, to the caller, we are advising the government on the benefits of developing that area. So that is the role. I just want to share with the caller that is the role, and that is some of the work that we are doing at this time. Those are just two little examples. I think June has some more to share.
Yes, thanks, Carl, for that question. It's twofold. You have like the international response, where we join the international community in reducing global emissions, but the one that you're asking about mainly is about adaptation, how we could adapt to the changes that we're seeing. The PS mentioned a couple where you look at storing water, because our rainfall patterns have changed, so water is becoming less reliable than in the past. So we encourage people to purchase one of the black tanks if you have the financial wherewithal to build a cistern, so that in the dry season you can take some of the pressure off of the water department by tapping into your stored water. You can also, and this is on one side, there's adaptation and there is mitigation. You could use, tap into the renewable energy sources. So you can buy solar, you can buy a solar water heater, you could use, there are lots of things that use solar energy. You could use stuff that uses wind energy. Almost every sector has a means by which it can adapt. And when I say sector, I mean health, I mean tourism, I mean water, energy. And so I think, Mr. Williams, this can take a good long conversation. We need to come back and have this conversation, because it's a good question, and by the fact that the gentleman asked it means that we need to get more information out and tell people how they can adapt to the changes that are happening.
Certainly.
Okay, just to also add to what the PS was saying in terms of projects that the Department of Environment has been doing to help in this area. There's also another climate change project that I know of. It is yet to come on stream. June, you could maybe speak more to it than I did. Is that of the electric school bus, which the department was helping to source as a pilot project to try as a way of to reduce emissions. We know a lot about electric vehicles and so forth, and this electric school bus would have been something to, I think it's an Italian project, Italian project where, the department would have more or less helped to source it, and it's a partnership with the Ministry of Education, so yes, the department is doing things, and I just wanted to highlight that so that persons could really know that the Department of Environment is really out there, and there's a lot of work that we're doing. So we're hoping that, this pilot project, this electric school bus will come on stream so persons will be able to see how it works, and maybe even later other investments can be made in getting even more electric vehicles here in St. Kitts.
One of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic has created is that there is less discussion on a number of things. Less discussion on the climate crisis. But at the very same time, what we have is that when we have environmental disasters, when we have natural disasters, then we realize that, look, it is not just a natural disaster. It is not just an environmental disaster, but we have two things that we have to contend with all at once. We have the COVID-19 pandemic to contend with. And if, God forbid not, a hurricane hits us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we not only have the COVID-19 to deal with, but we also have to manage this natural disaster and to mitigate against so many things. One, the transmission of the virus. If people have to go into community centers, the displacement of people and all of that, it could be a double disaster. You see, it could be a double disaster. And at the very same time, it is important that we take action, climate action, that the SDGs speak to. They speak to climate action, climate finance, yes, disaster risk reduction strategies. So we have to look at...
As you spoke there about the hurricanes, I would also like to emphasize that environment is part of the NEMA's team,
yes,
who advises, especially when during the season. Not only that, I'd like to emphasize that in this new project that we are going to be launching shortly, the Climate and Ocean Risk Vulnerability Index, CORVI, a project steering committee was formed to make sure that we have all the relevant stakeholders. And NEMA is very well represented there in the person of Ms. Vicky Southwell. She is there because, again, I emphasize the point, if we do not do this risk profile of Bastille, and in the future of our capitals like Charleston and other areas in St. Kitts, then we will be spending money and not channeling the money to where we really need to invest to mitigate and to become more resilient. So that is why those meaningful relationships are important across the government and
yes,
also with the private sector.
Right. Not only that, there's an interesting thing emerging even in terms of infectious diseases and climate change.
Yes. And gender. And climate change.
Yes.
Many things.
Many things, because especially with this infectious disease that we have now, the COVID-19, how can climate change, fuel it or mitigate against it?
We do to mitigate
because rising
it's there already.
And so on can bring about the spread of a lot of infectious diseases, and we know that some of them are called tropical diseases because of the heat and all of that sort of a thing, and it's sort of, so climate change can affect the spread of viruses, and it can also affect human health, heart-related conditions, and the pollution, and water pollution, air pollution, land pollution, and how that is impacting people's health.
Just
so,
across all populations, we see more persons with these asthmatic conditions.
Between. But as the world progresses, as we increase our consumption and production and more pollutants are in the air,
Yes.
and we have persons reacting to some of these chemicals, or what other word you have for them? Chemicals in the atmosphere.
Pollutants.
Let's say pollutants in the atmosphere.
Pollutants, yeah.
Okay? And so we have to take a look at that. So our COVID-19 has really offered us a pause of reflection. It has really offered us that, because the rate at which we are going, it's like the world was, they were saying it's time to just stop and rethink. So we have the opportunity to rethink and reimagine how we would approach certain things.
We're almost out of time. I don't know if there's anything else we want to say, but I want to pose this last question to Arion, seeing that you touched on the whole environmental degradation. You took us through that, the conservation and the protection, and what we must really do to restore the ecosystems, because that is basically the theme for this year's World Environmental Day.
Yes.
Ecosystem restoration, focus on resetting our relationship with nature. Now, do you foresee a pandemic of change?
Yes, of course.
Working for you, good afternoon, we have a call. Working for you, good afternoon. We lost that caller. Do we foresee a pandemic of change with respect to restoring the ecosystem?
It's a very, very good question, because you use an adjective there that make it sound like we've seen a lot in a short time, But it is our hope, because it doesn't matter how small the change is, as long as there's a change, we're hoping that there will be a spillover. And that is why, the little things that we do in certain areas, whether it is in the schools or different communities, that we try to really target community groups, so that what the Department of Environment cannot carry on, that these other community groups will also help us to carry on the message or the changes that we want to see. So I'll be optimistic about the question in terms of seeing a big change. I don't want to doubt our efforts. So I'll say I'm optimistic that the changes ahead, how drastic or how large they will be, it's something that you and I would have to wait and see.
Yes.
When I was growing up, very small things children learn. Keep your surroundings clean, your environment clean. Simple things, as you say. It might not be a pandemic of change, but at the very same time, one cocoa, full basket. And so if each of us can take very little action, sometimes our little actions have very, very large consequences, whether they be negative or positive. But small actions can reap big benefits. And June, I think, mentioned some of them, even in terms of water, what we can do to conserve water, given the fact that we are facing a drought.
That's absolutely.
And so on. So it might not be a pandemic of change, but very, very small changes, little things that we can do that can make a big difference in protecting our environment and conserving our environment. P.S., is there anything that you would like to say?
To let the general public of St. Kitts Nevis know that environment is not on the periphery. When you hear climate change, pay more attention, because we would want you to think of climate change and how it impacts your everyday life, because it does. Maybe you don't recognize it on a daily basis, but it does affect. When there's no water, when they're having a water problem, that is linked to climate change. So we want you to do that, and we are assuring you that we will be using this platform to keep you updated, because we have been working on many things. For example, we want you to keep your ears to the ground on the proposal of the new bill that we would like the NCEMA to replace the NCEMA to replace NCEPA. And the plastics, remember, we are still continuing with our consultations, and we would have something to present to Cabinet by the end of year. And we also have this new project that would help us to build the profile of Bastille so that it can better inform the government stakeholders and the private stakeholders as to what could be the future planning for Bastille. Because if you look at Bastille, you have coastal erosion. When an onslaught of a hurricane comes, we are slammed in. We are slammed. You have fuel lines in Bastille. You have urban sprawl. It is a plethora of climate challenges right there in Bastille. And we look forward to this project, and we want to thank the ICDF of Taiwan. We are working with the Stimson Center in Washington along with the ICDF to implement this project. And it would be a project where we would be able to assess holistically where we are and help us to make better decisions going forward. So keep your ears tuned for the Ministry of Environment and Cooperatives.
Right. I want to thank all three of you, Darion, the P.S. Rattan, and Ms. June Hughes, for coming and participating in this forum today, talking about and make discussion on such an important topic, that of the environment. We know the impacts on the environment, and we know the impacts of the environment on us. And in the context of where we are now with the COVID-19 pandemic, our social environment becomes important, and the physical environment, and how we manage our social and physical environment in terms of the social distancing, the places where we go, the physical distancing, and all of that is really important to the management of the COVID-19 pandemic here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So thank you very much. It's really all about the environment. Thank you very much for listening to Working for You today. Those of you who continue to listen and to be our company from week to week, thank you very much. We thank our caller to today's program. Next week we will be back with another edition of Working for You. Next week I am going to have on this panel members of the Special Victims Unit of the police force, the Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force. Because, you know, one thing that happens during these lockdowns all over the world is that abuse increases. Men and women start abusing each other because they are locked down with each other, and so therefore the abuse is exacerbated, and it has serious impacts upon the home, it has serious impacts upon children, and this should not be tolerated. So next week we are going to have the Special Victims Unit on Working for You. Take good care. Until then, I am Les Roy Williams.